Good evening. We begin tonight with a significant and escalating diplomatic challenge stemming from Berlin and Moscow, one that centers on the physical deployment of foreign troops along Europe's troubled eastern flank. Germany has officially put forward the most detailed proposal yet for the long-term security of Ukraine, confirming that its NATO-style security guarantee could explicitly include the option of deploying military personnel, primarily focused on training and rapid deterrence. This crucial development, occurring over the last 48 hours, has been met with immediate and categorical rejection from the Kremlin. Moscow states that the introduction of any non-contractual foreign military presence near its borders represents an intolerable escalation, and has explicitly warned that associated infrastructure would be deemed legitimate targets. The German proposal marks a definitive operational shift in the West's commitment to Kyiv, moving beyond financial and material aid toward a physical assurance of future security. On Tuesday afternoon, December 16th, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz delivered the statement during a joint press conference held in Berlin, clarifying the structure of the security package long discussed among G7 members. Chancellor Scholz publicly confirmed that the Article 5-style security guarantees, being formalized, must now be operationalized. This is the key phrasing, the pivot from a diplomatic promise to a tactical plan. The Chancellor went on to specify precisely what that operationalization entails. He stated that the framework under discussion includes the option for troop deployment. Critically, he framed this presence not as permanent basing, but as a dedicated mission for training, logistical support, and most importantly, rapid deterrence. This is a subtle but vital distinction in military and diplomatic terms, aiming to establish a tripwire mechanism without incurring the political costs of a full-scale garrison. Furthermore, Chancellor Scholz was keen to differentiate this initiative. He explicitly defined the planned deployments as operating under a separate bilateral or multilateral framework, deliberately ensuring that they remain outside the formal structure of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's Article 5 guarantee. This separation is crucial for managing the current conflict status and minimizing the risk of a direct, alliance-wide confrontation. The formal diplomatic process moved swiftly. Late on Monday, December 15th, the German Foreign Office, the Auswärtiges Amt, confirmed that it had delivered a detailed, non-binding outline of the proposed guarantee structure. This blueprint was forwarded not only to NATO headquarters in Brussels, situated just off the Boulevard Leopold III, but also to key European Union capitals, specifically Paris and Warsaw, underscoring the continental nature of this initiative. The reaction from the Kremlin was immediate and uncompromising. On Wednesday morning, December 17th, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov issued a terse, recorded rejection through Russia's state news agency TASS. Mr. Peskov stated that Russia views the deployment of any non-contractual, mission-based foreign military units in the zone bordering the Russian Federation as an immediate and intolerable escalation. The language used was stark, designed to signal an absolute red line being crossed by the potential introduction of German or other Western troops. Even before the Chancellor's full statement, Moscow had signaled its deep apprehension. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirmed on Tuesday, December 16th, that Moscow had received diplomatic communication regarding the German proposal via NATO channels. Minister Lavrov went further than Mr. Peskov, asserting that Russia would consider the presence of German troops, even if deployed strictly under the guise of training missions or logistical support, as direct participation in hostilities. Minister Lavrov underscored this warning by asserting that Russia reserves the right to target any associated military infrastructure. This threat is highly significant. It implies a willingness to strike command posts, logistical hubs, barracks, and maintenance facilities utilized by these potential foreign contingents, blurring the line between indirect support and direct military involvement. To understand the weight of Berlin's proposal, we must look at the specific intent behind operationalization. Western strategy since the major escalation in 2022 has focused on building Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. This new German approach shifts the focus to deterrence. While the Chancellor's office emphasizes training and rapid response, anonymous senior officials within the German Defense Ministry, the MOD, have offered further detail. Reports suggest that the proposed troop contingent would involve a rotational, short-term deployment. Sources speaking confidentially late on Tuesday claimed the size could range from a mechanized battalion to a full brigade structure. Crucially, these unnamed officials assert that the force would be designed explicitly as a tripwire force, rather than a combat-ready permanent garrison. A tripwire force is deliberately small enough to avoid appearing provocative, yet large enough that its immediate engagement in conflict would automatically trigger the commitment of the sending nation's larger forces. This concept is intended to guarantee that any future aggression automatically draws in German military action, fulfilling the guarantee's promise. However, it must be stressed that the specific size, structure, or mandate of this rumored tripwire brigade has not been officially confirmed by the Chancellor's office, remaining, for now, a key claim based on internal deliberations. Simultaneously, the financial underpinning of this deployment is being discussed in Brussels. Claims circulating among diplomatic circles suggest that the German proposal is intrinsically linked to establishing a new, accelerated tranche of the European Peace Facility funding. The EPF, typically used to reimburse member states for military equipment donated to Kyiv, would, under this alleged new mechanism, subsidize the significant operational and logistical costs incurred by any participating EU members deploying personnel for this guarantee mission. The establishment and exact allocation of this funding mechanism, however, remain unverified at this hour. Looking ahead, the domestic political process in Germany has also begun to solidify. Sources within the German parliament claim that the complete proposal will be put before the Bundestag for preliminary legislative approval sometime between January 15th and January 20th of the new year, 2026. This timeline is critical, representing the first major legislative checkpoint for the guarantee, though it remains inherently subject to change based on ongoing negotiations in Brussels and Kyiv. Kyiv's response to the German initiative has been cautiously welcoming. On Monday, December 15th, before Chancellor Scholz's formal announcement, President Volodymyr Zelensky's office issued a brief statement. They welcomed Berlin's articulation of a concrete vision for post-conflict security. However, Kyiv also attached a significant conditionality to its endorsement. The statement cautioned that the ultimate proposal must ensure deterrence readiness within 90 days of any ratified agreement. This emphasis on a swift, 90-day deployment capability highlights Kyiv's concern that the guarantees must be actionable immediately, not delayed by bureaucratic inertia. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, meanwhile, maintains a position of supportive detachment. On Tuesday, December 16th, the NATO Secretary-General issued a statement acknowledging the German proposal. The alliance leader noted that while NATO itself is not a party to these proposed bilateral or multilateral guarantees, as the guarantees fall under specific national or EU frameworks, the alliance views the German initiative as constructive in bolstering regional stability. This reflects NATO's consistent policy of separating the actions of individual member states from the formal obligations of the collective Article 5, ensuring that the alliance itself does not become automatically involved in the specific bilateral arrangements. The escalating rhetoric from the Kremlin is not merely diplomatic posturing. It reflects deep-seated historical and strategic anxieties that have been exacerbated over the last decade. To grasp the significance of Foreign Minister Lavrov's threat to target military infrastructure, we must consider the history of the security guarantees themselves. The discussion of non-NATO security guarantees began in earnest after the Vilnius summit in the summer of 2023. At that time, NATO members, unable to offer full Article 5 membership due to the ongoing conflict, pivoted toward bilateral commitments from G7 nations. Germany, alongside the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, pledged to develop frameworks to ensure Ukraine's long-term defense capability. The initial understanding was predominantly financial and focused on the rapid supply of weapons, technology, and intelligence sharing. The introduction of the option for troop deployment, even rotational training forces, fundamentally changes the strategic calculus. It places foreign soldiers directly in the potential line of fire, giving teeth to the abstract concept of deterrence. Moscow views this as a direct intrusion into its defined security sphere, a concept rooted in its geopolitical doctrine asserting a buffer zone against Western military expansion. Since the events of 2014, Russia has consistently viewed any increase in NATO or NATO-aligned military presence near its borders as a direct threat to its territorial integrity. The deployment of German troops, a legacy power in Europe with historic significance to Russia, is perceived as particularly provocative, regardless of the mission's stated purpose. The Kremlin has responded to this perceived threat with alarming rhetorical escalation. Beyond the official statements by Peskov and Lavrov, there are unverified, yet critical, claims regarding potential Russian countermeasures. Unnamed Russian military analysts and State Duma deputies made statements on state television on Wednesday, December 17th, claiming that any actual deployment of Western troops would trigger an immediate, limited activation of Russia's reserve forces in the Western Military District. These analysts specifically cited the likely deployment of additional tactical missile systems, including the advanced Iskander systems, near the Belarusian border. While this claim serves an obvious propaganda purpose, it underscores the serious military planning occurring in Moscow in response to the German proposal. There has been no official confirmation or order from the Russian Ministry of Defense regarding any mobilization or specific missile deployment linked directly to the Bundestag's potential vote. Furthermore, diplomatic sources suggest that the Kremlin has already delivered a stern, private message to Berlin. A report published in the Financial Times, citing two unnamed Western diplomatic sources, alleges that the diplomatic note delivered by the Kremlin included a firm ultimatum. The report claims Moscow demanded that Germany cease all discussions on foreign troop presence by year-end, threatening a unilateral termination of the complex and highly sensitive ongoing Black Sea grain corridor renewal talks. This ultimatum, if true, demonstrates the high-stakes leverage Moscow is willing to employ to stop the operationalization of the security guarantee. The specific content of this private diplomatic note remains unverified by either Berlin or Moscow. Asterisk. The German decision to include the troop option reflects the deep transformation of German security policy over the past few years, a transformation often referred to as the Zeitenwende, or turning point. Historically, Germany has been cautious, even reluctant, to project military power, a stance rooted in post-war pacifism and the strategic imperative of maintaining economic stability. However, the events of 2022 fundamentally shifted the calculus, leading Chancellor Scholz to announce a massive increase in defense spending and a commitment to assuming a greater leadership role in European security. The current proposal is the practical expression of this Zeitenwende. Germany is attempting to bridge the gap between providing credible defense and avoiding direct confrontation. The proposed framework is designed as a delicate balance. It must be robust enough to satisfy Kiev's demand for genuine deterrence while being limited enough to avoid tripping the wire into a broader war with Russia, a risk constantly highlighted by the opposition within Scholz's own Social Democratic Party. The specifics of the troop mission, training and logistical support, are often precursors to deeper commitments. Training missions allow Western forces to familiarize themselves with the theater of operations, establish essential communication networks, and pre-position equipment. This makes a transition to rapid defense easier if deterrence fails. By establishing these bases and logistics chains, however, Germany is effectively creating the infrastructure that Minister Lavrov explicitly threatened to target. This raises profound questions about rules of engagement. If German troops, serving a training and logistics function, are hit by Russian missile strikes in an area deemed critical by Moscow, how would Berlin respond? Would the bilateral guarantee immediately compel a military retaliation, bypassing the slower, consensus-driven process of NATO? These are the complex scenarios military planners in both Berlin and Brussels are urgently trying to map out. Asterisk. The ripple effect of this German move extends far beyond the immediate conflict zone, touching on the stability of the European Union, the future architecture of deterrence, and global security perceptions. For the European Union, the linking of the guarantee proposal to the European Peace Facility funding mechanism signals a deeper integration of military burden sharing. The EPF was created outside the EU budget to fund aid. If it is now repurposed or expanded to subsidize the operational costs of deploying national troops under a multilateral guarantee framework, it significantly transforms the EU's role from just a financial donor to a direct contributor to expeditionary security missions on the continent's perimeter. This development would likely receive strong support from Eastern European states like Poland and the Baltic nations, who have long advocated for a more proactive, militarily capable EU. The response from third parties also provides key insights into the global reception of the West's commitment. China, for instance, is closely monitoring how NATO and its allies manage the current geopolitical crisis. The successful implementation of a robust, actionable security guarantee, backed by the deployment of personnel, sends a powerful signal regarding the West's willingness to defend allies against territorial encroachment. This precedent is highly relevant to China's long-term strategic calculations regarding Taiwan. Conversely, if the Kremlin's rhetorical threats successfully deter the deployment, it will be seen in Beijing and elsewhere as a successful demonstration of coercive power, weakening the credibility of Western security promises. For the global South, the focus remains divided. Many nations in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia are primarily concerned with the economic fallout. Specifically, the stability of commodity markets and food supply. The unverified claim that the Kremlin might threaten to terminate the Black Sea grain corridor renewal talks underscores this critical linkage. If Moscow uses essential global food supplies as leverage to prevent a military deployment, it highlights the extreme pressure points in this diplomatic standoff and further complicates relations between the West and the global South, which relies heavily on that corridor for staples. Let us return to the specifics of the current situation and the tight timeline facing Berlin. The German government, driven by the need to show decisive action following months of diplomatic promises, appears determined to push this proposal through its legislative process. The period between mid-January and the end of February 2026 will be defined by intensive legislative debate in the Bundestag. Key questions will focus on parliamentary oversight. Specifically, the degree to which the deployment of a potential tripwire brigade can be approved and maintained without constant, granular legislative oversight. The German system of parliamentary oversight on military missions is historically rigorous, and the opposition, particularly those skeptical of deeper military involvement in Eastern Europe, will demand strict controls on the mission's mandate, size, and duration. This internal political dynamic in Berlin is just as crucial as the external diplomatic negotiations with Paris and Warsaw. The critical danger remains the immediate and unambiguous rejection from Moscow. Kremlin spokesman Peskov's assertion of intolerable escalation and Foreign Minister Lavrov's specific threat to target associated military infrastructure transform the political risk into a kinetic one. The Kremlin understands that a diplomatic note cannot stop the legislative process in a sovereign state. Therefore, their strategy relies on maximal rhetorical pressure and the subtle threat of immediate military action to create a climate of fear sufficient to dissuade or water down the final deployment plan. If the German Bundestag approves the measure in January and foreign troops are deployed, even for training purposes, the region enters an entirely new phase of risk management. Deterrence relies on the clarity of commitment, but confrontation is fueled by the crossing of perceived red lines. Germany's proposal is a commitment that directly confronts Russia's self-declared red line, setting the stage for perhaps the most acute phase of geopolitical tension since the initial escalation 2 years ago. In summary, Germany is moving forward to operationalize its security guarantee, explicitly including the option for military presence aimed at deterrence and training, emphasizing a non-NATO framework. Russia has rejected this outright, warning that associated infrastructure will be targeted as involvement in hostilities. Kyiv welcomes the clarity, but demands 90-day readiness. All eyes now turn to the German Bundestag and the political maneuverings in Moscow, where the stakes involve not only the future of European security, but the avoidance of an accidental escalation between major powers. We will continue to track the verified facts from Berlin and Moscow as the diplomatic process unfolds over the coming weeks, leading up to the critical legislative period in the new year. Good evening.